So, Brad, I got to tell you, people that can't multitask shouldn't tell stories. I went to get a haircut this week, and I was kind of in a rush to get in and out of the haircut place. And the very kind, what is the term? What is the accepted nom de guerre today for a hair? Is it hairdresser? Is it a hair cutter? Is it
a
barber?
Beautician maybe?
Beautician?
Barber? I'm not sure.
What they're doing with me cannot be described in any way as beautician. There's no beauticianing. It's more like, trimming back a hedge that no one likes in a yard is what it is.
Landscaping.
Landscaping. So I go to see the landscapist, and anyway, she's from Brazil, and I sparked up with that because I love Brazil, and I started talking about Brazil. And unfortunately, she launched into this whole diatribe about Bolsonaro. And I don't know how we got on Bolsonaro as a topic. But first of all, I was like, abandoned ship. I don't want to talk about Bolsonaro.
Right.
But it was the kind of thing where, have you ever had it where you're at their mercy because they're standing there with the scissors? Yeah. You can't say, hey, please just keep cutting. You can go ahead and talk, but just keep cutting while you talk. So I had like a 15-20 minute haircut turn into like a 45-50 minute haircut.
Oh my God.
Because she kept stopping and being, I'll tell you another thing. And then it was just like 5 minutes of diatribe about Bolsonaro. And I was like, how did I get stuck here? And also, don't talk if you can't multitask.
Right. It's even worse if you're having a straight blade razor cut. He's swinging that blade by your jugular. You do not want. The problem is that they've got your entire outlook in their hands, because if you end up getting lippy with a stylist, then you're going to walk out of there looking like Mo Howard. You gotta be polite. They've got a lot of sway over how the next couple of weeks of your life is going to go until your hair grows out again. So you got to be nice. No, I don't like. And by the way, have you ever talked to somebody like this? It's like when they come to a fork in the road, they take it and they start out telling you a story, and they never tell you the story. Hey, let me tell you about the time. I knew somebody like this here in the building. Let me tell you about the time I went to my brother's birthday, and you'll never believe what happened with his birthday cake. We are driving down there. We went down there, and we had to turn off on Route 1. Do you remember Route 1? They had that restaurant over there on Route 1. I used to go down there and get the good pancakes. Boy, do I ever love a good pancake. I had pancakes the other day, and I put maple syrup on them and just a little bit of butter. It was fantastic, but my doctor says I can't even eat butter anymore, so I'm having margarine. Speaking of margarine, I had a migraine last week, and that sounded like a margarine, and I decided maybe there's a connection between. And she talks for the next 45 minutes and never gets to the birthday cake. I never found out what happened to the birthday cake.
Yeah, there's a type of social interaction where they don't require feedback. You know what I mean? There's no feedback. It's a loop that'll just keep going. And that's why I don't even know how that exact same thing happened in this conversation. We started talking about Carnival, I think, and somehow we ended on Bolsonaro, and I was like, I don't want to talk Brazilian politics. I'm really uncomfortable with this whole thing. I don't. Please, can we go back to my haircut also? Why is this taking so long? And on that note, I'm going to say, so that I don't talk too long, hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about getting a haircut and making comics.
And getting a haircut and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal, Dave Kellett, creator of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab.
And a reminder to everyone that you could be watching us stream live each week as we record the show over at ComicLab Live Gab with our friends there.
And there's a concurrent chat running alongside the stream where we answer your questions before, during, and after the show.
And if you happen to miss the stream for Life Learning, it is archived each week so you can watch the stream later.
So do join us over at Patreon. And Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And what a fun thing to have a new intro. We haven't changed that up, Brad, in years.
No, we added a little spice to it, put a little zhuzh on it, as you would say. I think it's a great intro.
But like a kindergartner in a tutu walking out on stage, we're not sure what the gumdrop cue was to bring us out on stage there. That was, you could feel it. You could feel it in the air. Anyway, all right, Brad, so we've got a fun question to jump into right away. And boy, is this appropriate for Brad Geiger, who does something very similar. So I'm going to ask I'm going to ask this question of Brad. Brad, this question comes in over at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Brad and Dave, I'm working on an anthology series of graphic novels, which I originally envisioned as being rated R. But I'm realizing that most of my stories could easily be PG-13 by scaling back the bad language. Best of all, I don't think it would jeopardize the soul of the stories. What are your thoughts on having two versions of my books, a teen version and an adult version? The major difference in my series would be bad language. With the exception of one issue having a lot of blood and violence, that story should stay rated R. Would this help grow my audience so that different ages could enjoy the same story? Or does this only confuse my audience and cause production headaches? What are your thoughts? So, Brad, this is great for you because you, in some respects, do a version of this. Not really, but I would say it's in the neighborhood of this. But you have an NSFW version of Evil Inc., which is high above R, I would say.
Yes.
And then you have more of an all ages or near all ages version of Evil Inc., I would think. What are your thoughts on this question?
Well, I'll take it one step further than that. I'm doing exactly what he's talking about. Okay. In other words, for the next Evil Inc. book that comes out, I've gotten to a point where the Evil Inc. story hands off to an Evil Inc. After Dark story. And so there's a lot of combination between the two. You don't ever have to read the Evil Inc. After Dark to if you never read Evil Inc. After Dark, you can read the entire Evil Inc. story and be just fine. In other words, there's no important plot points that you're missing over at Evil Inc. After Dark. But right. I've got it purposefully made up in the last several chapters that will go into the next book, so that there will be a Evil Inc. book, and there will be the same exact book with the After Dark parts added in. And that'll be a adults only Evil Inc. After Dark book. So it's very similar, if not exactly what he's talking about. And that's why it's going to sound a little bit surprising that I'm going to tell him this is a horrible idea. Listen, do as I say, not as I do. No, it sounds really weird after all of that workup, because I am doing exactly the same thing. But it's not exact. And here's where the differentiation is. There's a huge difference between my PG-13 Evil Inc. and the X Evil Inc. Or the X-rated Evil Inc. After Dark. Right. Okay. There's a huge difference. I could not do them both. Right. I couldn't combine them. What he's talking about, or this person, I'm not sure who's writing this question in, but who this person is talking about is dropping a few F-bombs and maybe one chapter of blood that was going to stay R anyway. For that, you're adding so many production headaches, so much trouble for such a very razor thin increase that you might get. I think you are much better to decide which of those audiences you're going to go for and make your story good. So that you get the best chunk out of that audience. If this book is going to be best going towards a teen readership, then shoot for that teen readership and take the F-bombs out. If that's not appropriate, then shoot for the older adult readership that can take the F-bombs, shoot for that R-rated audience and do that. But you're not going to gain enough in doing those two things. You're going to add a lot of confusion because there's not as big of a difference between PG and R as there is between PG and X, right? So this is not a great idea for you. I'm going to keep doing it, but I'm going to argue that it's apples to oranges when you get right down to it.
Mr. Geiger, I want to grow up and be just like you. Get away, kid. Nobody can do what I can do.
Do as I say. Like I tell my kids all the time, do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, exactly. Scram, kid, you're bothering me.
Yeah.
No, I take your meaning very well with this, which is for you, it's a matter of degrees. And this is like, it's like a chef saying, what if I cook it for an extra 2 minutes at 300? Will that make a big difference? Well, no, not really, you know? And I actually want to argue a different point. And I know that sometimes I can come across like a 1950s prude, but I want to make the argument that if you feel like this could be written without the cuss words for a teen or a slightly more all ages audience, not all ages, but well, let's just stick with teen. If you could write this so that it's just as powerful, but be for a teen audience, for me anyway, there's a strong argument that cuss words are like the poor man's writing technique in terms of like, it's the cheap out. Like, I mean, Shakespeare went so far as to invent words to capture a moment, you know, like bittersweet, like creating a word in English that was evocative and powerful and captured the moment. It's cheaper to go like, fuck, rather than go like, oh, this is bittersweet. You know, like that's what
I've often been in a situation where I bang my thumb with a hammer and I say, that's bittersweet.
No, but what I'm trying to get at here is I often am watching TV going, this is hack, because they're just going to the one tool in the toolkit, which is to throw out expletives all the time. And they have their place, don't get me wrong, but they're powerful for a reason. And if you're throwing every second line in with an expletive, I feel like that's a cheating type of writing that doesn't get you as much as better writing would, working for a better phrase, getting something evocative in there that truly has meaning, that is not just a fallback crutch.
I'm going to go one step further, and this one I will really call myself out on. What I'm hearing here is somebody who's not confident in the writing. They're not confident in the quality of their product. So
you're saying the question asker.
Yes. No, okay, you're fine, Dave. You're fine. But the question asker is questioning whether they're good enough. Which, listen, there's only one way to do this, and that's to keep doing it and keep learning. Yeah. That's how we all do it. But when I hear this thing that goes, hey, I could get more people buying this book if I did one version that was like this and one version that was like that, because the unspoken part of that is I'm not going to get enough if I just stick to one. And that's questioning your quality, right? So if you've got questions about your quality, number one, you see what I mean? They're trying to do a gimmick. They're trying to do a gimmick. And then you've got to go back and say, okay, have I done everything I can to make this the best it could be? And then you just got to trust yourself. And here's why I know that this is true, because you're looking at a guy that relied on a gimmick for the first, what was I up to? 9 books? First 9 books that I published under Evil Inc. If you remember, Dave, I was doing a comic strip. But when I did the graphic novels, what did I do? I took those individual panels of the comic strip and I rearranged them into a graphic novel. You know why? Because at the end of the day, I didn't think that comic strip was good enough. I needed a gimmick. I needed a hook. I needed something that I could talk to with people at a comic convention that wasn't the quality. Because the nagging little voice in there was, you're not there yet. And you're going to need a gimmick. And this was my gimmick. And instead of just laying out a collection of comic strips, which is relatively easy, right? There's a script in Adobe InDesign where it's called the library script. And you just go bink, 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 and you place them on the page. You go back, touch them up a little bit. You've laid out your book. It's very easy to lay out a collection of comic strips. Doing this was incredibly difficult, right?
Yeah.
It was... It was very hard.
Laborious.
And it was laborious, and the value add was negligible, right? I remember standing there, and by the way, I did it for 9 books. Here's just a spoiler alert, 9 books I did this for. But I would say to people, take a look. I do it on the web as a comic strip, but I take the individual pages and lay out a graphic novel, and I would flip through the pages, and I could see 9 degrees of I don't care flash in front of their face, right? It was like, great, let me get out of here. I got to stop talking to this guy. So when I say to you, that I think you're questioning your quality. When I got one finger pointed at you, I got three more fingers pointed back at myself, because I know this, because I'm very familiar with the feeling. I needed a gimmick. I needed any little edge that I could get, and it was a waste of time.
So if I hear you correctly, Brad, what you're saying to this question asker is, find which of these two paths you believe in, which one's the one you want to do, and stick to it. Just go commit to it, basically.
Yep.
That we hear you, that in your mind it would be comparatively little effort to rewrite certain things and publish two versions and track two sets of files and all this sort of stuff. We hear you on that, but Brad is saying, believe in yourself and believe in the story that you want to write.
Right.
Whether it's the PG-13 version or the R version. I think my heart tells me it sounds like the R version is the one you want to write.
Yeah.
So maybe stick to it, because Lord knows there's an audience for an R level writing out there for comics.
Well, you're absolutely right. And the thing is, there are more than enough people in that audience that if you've written a good book, you've got more than enough people there to support a business, to support that book, to support your efforts. There's more. Right. You don't have to go poaching from this other crowd. And by the way, there's going to be a fair number of people that are going to read it that go across age barriers and other content barriers. There's more than enough people there for you. You don't need a gimmick to try and fish in other ponds. If you spend all your time, listen, if you're going to do an R-rated book, if you spend all this time that you're going to do it looking for F-bombs and redoing the book and doing two different, all the time that you're taking into that, do me a favor. Take it and put it into the quality of the book. Find some beta readers for you and have them, some people that you trust, and have them look through it and give you the God's honest, blatant, unvarnished opinion of what you're doing, and then listen to what they're saying. Take that time and use it for something productive and do the best freaking R-rated book you can do. Then you've maximized your chances of success. This push button gimmick thing, it's a waste of time. And I know it because I'm the all-time master of time wasting gimmicks.
Well, can we turn the mirror for a second, Brad? Does this question make you look at the process that you've established for yourself? Or
no, again,
I'm
different.
La, Brad.
I'm different
down the street.
It's so different because I've built it this way. These are stories that I've kept separate. They're completely different.
It's so different. This is everything. There's not an ounce of similarity to this.
But I'll tell you this. I've spent the last 2 years debating this very thing in my head. Do I really want to do this? And by the way, we might be sitting down at this chair a year from now after a failed Kickstarter, or a Kickstarter that just didn't go. Or the other problem is I'll have two very similar books out there. One is PG, one is a hard X. And if there's confusion about those two and somebody ends up with the wrong book, they didn't think, is it going to be worth that? I've been going back and forth on that in my mind for 2 years. So I haven't gotten to this place easily, but this is a lot different than taking out a couple F-bombs. These are stories that were purposefully written to be here, purposefully written to be there. And then I've made a connector between the two so you can read them together.
Right.
It's kind of a different thing. It's kind of, I'll argue for a long time on that.
I'm mainly joking because I was sort of curious if there was any sort of physician heal thyself in that question. So let me ask you, the thing that tells me that this is leaning towards R anyway, and you should just follow your heart, is the fact that you said, even if I changed all the language problems, there would be violence problems. Yeah. Which, for most American audiences, you might not realize it, but for, let's say, European or sometimes outside of American audiences, The problem is usually not the language. It's American versions of like acceptabilities of violence.
Yes.
Because American censors will be like, well, there's only 2 beheadings. That's fine for 8 and above. That's fine, you know.
As long as there wasn't any nudity, we're okay with the beheadings.
We saw 1/8 of a man's butt cheek. All right, well, that's triple X. So, but in Europe, it's the opposite. You'll have like a scene in a grocery store where everybody's nude, and that's fine. But God forbid there's violence. So what I'm getting at here is that like the thing that you might find, oh, well, this is fine for teens. You might find your international audience is like, that's not fine for teens at all. This is incredibly violent. Like that's not acceptable. So you might as well lean into the R rating because it sounds like that's where this story needs to live anyway. So I think both Brad and I end up with the same answer on this, on this one. And we wish you well with it because believe in yourself, believe in the story that you started telling and go forward with it.
So, Dave, we've got another question from one of our Patreon backers. And this question we get every now and again. It's worth talking about, if only because it's a little bit depressing. This guy says, hey, guys, Tom here. How many hours do you spend pen to paper or whatever you're drawing on per workday? I've worked myself into a little bit of RSI by overdoing it, and it still affects my output to this day. I feel like I'm too slow now, even though my comic stays on schedule. So, Dave, the question is, both of us are full-time comics artists. We're full-time cartoonists. This is our day job. How much time, and Tom says per day, let's just break it down into a week. How much time per week do you spend drawing?
Well, first of all, Tom, I much like Bill Clinton would say, I feel your pain here because I also had a repetitive stress injury that took 2 years of intensive physical therapy to get back on track, to get the nerve damage back close to where it should be. It still is a little bit wonky, but so definitely, if there's anyone listening that's feeling the twinges of repetitive stress injury, either coldness in extremities, nerve damage where you don't feel quite as right, or muscle control in your fine muscles, or just stiffness and soreness in a way that you know isn't right. Just as a friend, I want to tell you, don't ignore that because the sooner that you can catch it, especially with a good therapist, physical therapist, not therapist. How are you feeling about this, Brad? With a good physical therapist, the better it can be, especially with nerve damage. So anyway, that being said, like Brad, it's a little bit depressing when you start to break down the numbers of how little we get to draw for a career where we set out to draw. And so I, on average, do a page of Drive and 3 Sheldons a week. And I would guess that is somewhere between 12 and 20 pages of actual drawing, and then maybe another 5 hours of writing. I'm going to include that in there because the good news is I'm over 50% for my creative work for the week. Because writing sometimes gets short shrift. Short shrift, David, you could do it. But for example, the Drive page that I'm currently writing, I've been writing this page, Brad, for about 20 hours. Have you ever had a page where you just keep working it because it's not quite right yet?
Yes.
I've been writing this GD page for 20 hours and I can't land this plane. So this is an outlier, but I would say about 12 to 20 hours of drawing, maybe about 5 hours of writing. Brad, what is your average creative week?
Well, okay, so let me take it to you. Let's break this down. Monday, I spend usually teaching, right? So Monday is out. Tuesday, I spend here with you doing ComicLab. And by the time I'm done talking and doing this and ProTips, I'm kind of out of it, right? I'm
me
mentally...
too. Oh, my God. I'm so happy to hear you say that. Yeah. I have to kind of sit still for a while because I'm not used to talking solidly for 2 hours or whatever, as we end up doing.
And so I'll plan anything else for that the rest of the time I've got in my studio, whether it's like administrative stuff, taxes, this past
God,
week.
We are similar. Yes, I do the same thing. Oh, wow. I've never talked to you about this.
Yeah, I can't be creative anymore. It's like, I'm done.
Yeah.
So now that brings us to Wednesday, right? So Wednesday, I'll typically spend a lot of time, but Wednesday, I'm also catching up from some of the social media stuff that I needed to get done, doing some of the final touches. So a lot of times I don't really start until around noon on Wednesday, and then I can get some drawing done. So that takes me till, let's call that 6.5 hours. I'll go till 6:30. Thursday is often very much the same. I'll start out doing all this little thing needs to be done. That little thing needs to be done. I need to get things shaped up for next week's social media. I'm doing next week's social media planning and stuff like that, doing stuff for Patreon. If it's the beginning of the month, I've got a ton of stuff I do from Patreon. So usually I'm not doing a whole lot of stuff until noon. I can shift over and start drawing on. So there's another 6.5 hours. And Friday is often kind of the same. So let's see, let's give me another 6. So what's 6 times 3? 18, 20. And so on the weekend, now I often sneak off for a good chunk of time on Saturday and Sunday if the family's not doing anything, and that's when I can catch up on my writing.
Oh, me too.
And I can do some penciling.
Yeah,
and I often get a couple of 5-hour stints there. So I'm getting closer to 28 hours per week, and that's, by the way, that's working a 7-day week. Right? Because and if the family actually wants to go out and do something like normal families do, if we want to have company over, if we want to go someplace, if we want to take a vacation or just take a trip, a one tank trip, then I've got to accommodate all that other stuff, which is all stuff that's kind of what you're living for, is to be able to do stuff with your family. But when they actually want to do stuff, you got to fit it in, So there's all of that. So you'd think that we're spending a whole lot more time drawing than we are, but it's actually a precious little. And then out of all of that, I can get 1 page of Evil Ink, usually 1 page of After Dark, 2 or 3 commissions, and a single panel comic. Out of all of that, we'll round up and call it 30 hours over the course of a 7-day week. But there's not nearly as much drawing time as you might think that there is.
So I don't know that we've ever explicitly talked about this with one another, but I also steal 2 hours here, 4 hours there on the weekends, on a Saturday or on a Sunday, and then again the next day. And what's great is that some people might be like, oh, that's terrible, you have to work on the weekend. It's not when you love what you do. I genuinely love those stolen hours of like, oh, I get to draw for 2 more hours on a Saturday or a Sunday night. Oh, everyone's asleep. I'm still awake. Great. I'm going to draw a little bit more, that kind of thing.
And I'll do that too. I'll be the first one awake on Saturday morning because the house is quiet. I can brew some coffee, sit there, do some stuff. That's kind of the secret for a long time of doing this is I take the hours that nobody else wants. Right?
Yeah.
If everybody's in bed and I'm still up, I'm going to take those hours. If everybody's still sleeping in and I'm the first one up, I'm going to take those hours. I'm going to take the ones nobody else wants.
And I think those are coping mechanisms, I think, Brad, that we learned when we became parents, because parenting, if you're honest about it, is a lot of times stolen from you that you slowly gain back. You know what I mean? Yeah. So in that first year, you have everything stolen from you. And then by year 2, you gain a little bit back for nap times. And then, a little bit more back when they go to kindergarten or transitional kindergarten or whatever they call it. Yeah. And then first grade, and you gain a little bit more back when they go to school. And then they're doing after school sports or an after school play. You get a little bit more time there, that kind of thing. And so I think as parents, we've learned to find whatever time we can. And sometimes that bleeds into the weekends, and it is what it is. It's fine. But honestly, I love it when I can find those stolen hours because I genuinely love what I do. And so it's a version of why people always ask my wife and I, like, why don't you guys go on bigger vacations? And the truth is we like our job. Yeah. Like, it's joy filled to do our job. So we would, if anything, we always try, Brad and I always talk about this void that we could go into where we could get a bunch of stuff done. It's true. I wish we had it because I love what I do. But as far as drawing, I feel like younger me might be disappointed that I only get to draw 12 to 20 hours and then write 5 to whatever hours a week. Right. Maybe they would get disappointed, but I don't think younger me should, because there's a sort of a realism that in order to cook a fantastic dish, you also have to spend a couple hours chopping, and that's not the fun part, or washing the dishes from the last time, and that's not the fun part. What I'm getting at is every joy-filled creative activity has a lot of admin or prep work or things around it that make it possible for you to keep doing. And that's what powers me, Brad, through my admin, is that I know that as much as I hate the administrative stuff, it makes it possible for me to keep drawing next year and the year after and the year after that,
Yeah. So the upshot of all this is that, so you might be, if you're the question asker, you might be sitting and listening to all this. But the unspoken truth here is that nothing that we said matters to you. Because it doesn't matter. Here's what I mean. It doesn't matter how. So this person is asking us because he says, I don't think I draw quickly enough because I don't think I'm putting my page out often enough. I don't think that this. I don't think that. And how often or how long do you spend drawing? Well, I'm sorry. I don't mind entertaining the question, but the answer is useless. And you have to understand that it's useless. It doesn't matter how long it takes me to draw and how long it takes me to do a page. It matters how long it takes you to do a page.
You're
You're doing a different comic. You're a different person. You got a different style. You got a different life. None of this stuff that other than to share with you that like you might have this goal of becoming a full-time artist and you think, oh, when I become a full-time artist, I'll just draw all day. We'll happily disabuse you of that notion. But none of that other stuff matters. What matters here's what matters. How long does it take you to do a page? How long do you need to spend on a page so that you do work that you're proud of, so that you're putting work out? It doesn't matter if I just got done saying I put out basically 2 pages, 3 commissions, and a single panel cartoon, none of which is important to you. Here's what's important to you. What do you have to do so that you can hit your own? And we've said this before: frequent, significant, consistent. How do you have to work so that you can put out work that is as frequent as possible, and possible is the operative word, as frequent as possible, while still maintaining consistency in quality and in schedule, and every update is significant. You don't have an update where somebody just says, hey, I'm going to reach for a can of coffee. Okay, see you next week and see what happens when I grab my can of coffee. It's got to be significant. And everybody, I really do think after years of doing this, that frequent, consistent, significant is kind of the magic combination. And it doesn't matter what it takes for me to do FCS. The question that you need to ask yourself is, what does it take for you to do FCS? That's the only question that matters. None of that other stuff means beans.
Yeah. And I want to say, with love in my heart, I agree with what Brad's saying, which is that find what's right for you in the scheduling that you hear from us. But I also want to say, as a friend, that, listen, humans are social beings, and we're constantly, all of us, even Brad and I, looking around going, hey, is what I'm doing right? Is this normal the way I do it? Is everyone else kind of doing it this way? We're all kind of, our shoulders are kind of up. And we're like, hey, does this sound right the way I do this? I don't know. How do you do this XY thing? I don't know if I'm doing it right. So I get it. You're looking around basically saying, hey, Brad and Dave, how much time do you spend? Because I find that I have to spend way more time emailing. Okay, that's normal. Yeah. It's normal to ask and to sort of compare where you are with your other thing, with everyone else around you and with pros you know. But I want to tell you the story, because a lot of people don't know it, about Greg Ricketts, which was a poet, a New England poet, lived right next to Edgar Allan Poe. And Greg Ricketts cranked out poems. I mean, like, it was like 6 poems a day, like story poems. And so in the time that it took Edgar Allan Poe, I think it took him like 9 months to write The Raven, quoth the Raven nevermore. Yeah. It took Edgar Allan Poe 9 full months to write The Raven. Greg Ricketts was writing 6 story poems a day. Now, which one have you heard of?
Right. I was just going to say, and this is the first time I've ever heard somebody say the name Greg Ricketts.
Because I made up Greg Ricketts. The idea is, though, is that they're lost to history. They're lost to history. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter how long a thing takes, is what I'm trying to get at here. Like, you don't know how long it took Edgar Allan Poe to write The Raven. You don't know how long it took Emily Dickinson to write Because I Could Not Stop for Death, He Kindly Stopped for Me. None of us remember how long it took. As Brad says, it's the quality. It's the importance of the work itself. It's how much of an impact it can make. So if you are slow, if you're feeling like, oh shit, Brad and Dave are so much faster than I am, who cares? History won't care. Yeah. Work on the best comic that you can make that has an impactful, meaningful story, and you'll get to where you want to go, even if it takes a little longer.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Well, Brad, an update for everybody this week, and this is something that I wanted to pass along to the wider ComicLab community because I have never heard of this before. Maybe they do this every year. I don't know. But the New York Times is offering a portfolio review, an illustration portfolio review, sort of in a contest-y kind of way. And here's what I mean is that they're not giving everyone a portfolio review. Everyone is free to submit, and they'll choose what I think was something like 80 people to have a sort of Zoom sit-down with one of their graphics or illustrations editors to sort of get feedback on where you are, what you want to do, how you could improve, that kind of thing. And I think, a lot of people are looking out for, hey, how can I get professional feedback? This is an amazing way to do it. It is literally one of the world's best publications, I could say that word. And their editors are offering a free portfolio review, granted to a limited number of people, but it does specifically call out the fact that they're looking also at comics and cartoons. So do a quick Google search for the New York Times Illustration Portfolio Review. The applications are due in, and it's just a Google form, by June 16th. So that's number one. And then update number 2, Brad, I've got, and you've got in your hands there, a very special update for this week, in that it is Brad Geiger's birthday. He just turned 21, so he's legally able to drink. And I have pre-mailed him a package that he is going to open live on the show right now. He's starting in on the outer package. Brad, would you like to describe for folks what you're holding?
I'm holding how big is that? 12 by 12 by 10. It's 12 by 12 by 10. It's a good sized package here. It's been sitting in my studio, leering at me ever since, the timestamp here is February 8th. So you've had this planned out for quite a long time. And it's just been sitting there. And you'll notice, Dave, I have not opened it. I have not tampered with the box in any way.
No, I see that. What patience you've had.
I've had very good patience.
I have to tell you, sometimes in life, you stumble upon a gift that is just perfect for a friend, or you hope it's perfect anyway. I hope you like this gift. And so you buy it 3 months early for their birthday. There's a lot of birthdays in our lives where we're desperate the night before the birthday party to have the gift ready. But this one made me laugh so much, and it was in such good shape. I want to tell you, it's not a new gift. It's a time. What's the word that I'm looking for here? It's an antique is the word I'm looking for. It's an antique. But it's very specific, and I think you will love it. Because he's got the box open now, and
it's got a phone cord.
There's a fair amount of nonsense inside with plastic wrap and foam cord because it had to ship fairly carefully. But I'll go quiet now as Brad reveals.
I've got a little bit of. I'm trying to do this and stay close. Oh my God. Well, I am pulling out what can only be described. It is a Ziggy telephone. Ziggy holds the phone in his hand right there. I'm holding it up for the live stream audience. That is amazing. And that's a really good size.
I am told, Brad, that it is still a working telephone in the U.S. Bell system. So congratulations that you could plug that right into an existing phone jack.
Oh my God. Hold on. I'm taking it out so we can see it in all of its glory. Oh, it hangs right up.
See? So for those that are not able to see it on the live stream, it's about an 8 to 10 inch tall molded Snoopy. He's got these ridiculous sneakers on, which, by the way, normally doesn't Ziggy Donald Duck it? Does Ziggy ever have pants on?
That's a good question. I always confuse him with those Love Is people. Those folks never had pants, but I think Ziggy might wear pants.
Did he have pants? So for some reason, I always associated Ziggy with no pants, no shoes. Anyway, in this sculpt, for reasons of being able to stand up and hold the phone, he's got these gigantic Converse shoes on, which doesn't feel like Ziggy at all. But it's actually a really good sculpt of Ziggy, and he's holding his weird little dog. And then in his other hand is outstretched in a flat palm, and it holds a traditional, not a cell phone, obviously, a traditional phone
with a big red,
Brad's holding it up.
with a big red curly cord. It's amazing. And he's got the crooked smile, the wiggly line for the smile, making it a perfect Ziggy, kind of like, looks like someone's calling you again.
Well, that reminds me, Brad, of my favorite Ziggy joke. You remember this one? Ziggy's punchline was
I remember it because I've got it hanging right up here in my audience.
Oh, you're gonna do it? Okay. I was preparing one.
I thought you were catching me. Well, we can compare favorite Ziggies. The one that's on my wall over here is. It turns out. All this time, I was expecting the call of the wild. I picked up the phone. It was the call of the mild. I'm Ziggy. What was the one that you had?
So mine's hanging in my hallway, so I have to kind of lean to read it because it's I put it in the hallway because I liked it so much. And mine says,
I hear Google does the same thing.
Mine goes a little bit something like this. He goes, the only call that I got is from the sweet embrace of death. I'm Ziggy.
I do remember there was that period of time that
it went really
Ziggy
dark, that period of Ziggy. Yeah, it was
dark and existential. Yes,
Ziggy was working through some stuff. So anyway, my friend, happy birthday to you. I'm sure from everybody at ComicLab. I saw that phone, that stupid phone. And I said, "Oh, that's for Brad. That's going in his studio."
That's absolutely gorgeous. I'm gonna have to find a place for a place of honor right back there on the shelf for him to be displayed.
Now, listen, you don't have a phone jack in the studio, do you? I doubt you do.
I do not think I've got a phone jack in here. No, I don't think I do. No, I do not have a phone jack, unfortunately.
So the house that I'm living in now doesn't even have a phone jack. They didn't even put a phone jack in. Isn't that interesting that that's the world we live in now? They didn't even put a phone jack in.
When did they build your house?
4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Okay, so you're in a new house. Yeah, mine was built like 1920 or something. We've got a phone jack, but it's an old kind. It's got 3 holes in it. Like we had to buy an adapter because
3 holes? That's the old like early Ma Bell connector thing.
Welcome to Philadelphia.
Oh my God, 3 holes. That's like the that movie with the 3 seashells. You ever heard about it? Anyway, so Brad, I'm excited that it's your birthday. I'm excited that you're turning 21. I hope you were able to tip back your first ever beer on our behalf. And please do enjoy your Ziggy.
Thank you very much. That was super thoughtful of you. So I tell you what, before I blush too much, let's go on to another spreading some more joy with a question over here from one of our Patreon backers. This one comes in from Alexi, who says, can you talk about building escalation and tension? I'm having trouble figuring out when it's right to escalate things steadily or when to do it quickly. and also account for the number of panels on a page. Now, Alexi's a longtime listener, so he knows I'm going to jump at him. So he adds this. I know that the number of panels doesn't matter as much. I know that, Brad, he's saying. But sometimes it feels like it's taken too long. So it's obvious then. And then at other times, it's not so obvious. So Alexi wants us to talk about narrative tension, how to build tension, Dave. How are we going to address this?
So this is good. And this actually, oddly enough, relates to my hairdresser at the beginning of the show, because telling stories, even recounting stories to family and friends, is a good way to gauge your own sense of storytelling, because you realize that, much like telling a joke, telling a story that builds and grows to tension is very similar to how we do it in comics. You're like blowing up a balloon. You're building up the tension. You're building it up at an appropriate pace. You're not overextending how much tension is in that balloon. And then at the right moment of your choosing, you pop it, right? And that's storytelling, but it's also joke telling. And it's not an accident that a lot of people, not just me, a lot of storytellers will say that if you can write comedy, you can write drama. But if you can write drama, it's a little bit harder to write comedy. So I think it has been advantageous to me in terms of writing Drive and the dramatic and tension-filled moments of Drive that I've done 20, 25 years of writing comedy, because you start to develop an intuitive sense of when to build tension, when to extend it out, or when to curtail it and get to the delivery, get to the blow and pop that balloon. So I would advise, oddly enough, for those of you that are into writing comedy, continuing to write comedy is actually a great way to practice writing even dramatic tension, because they use often very similar tools. But Brad, I know you have a whole talk that you do for your class on writing, and that you've done on webcomics.com about building tension.
Well, I absolutely do. And actually, when I start this lecture at University of the Arts, the first thing I say is, if you want to learn how to write a good story, learn how to tell a joke. And I actually suggest that they go and find some jokes that they can tell. Like, there's a whole subreddit for jokes that gets updated every day. And, some of them are quite good. Some of them you've heard before. But I suggest they go and memorize a joke like that and then tell it to their friends. And because you get instant feedback. If you told the joke right, it'll get a solid laugh. If you haven't built that tension right, it won't. Right. And you learn, as is so often happens, by screwing things up. So I can tell you, I learned a lot about building tension, not only from joke telling, but in my own comic. I remember very clearly, there was one time I had a reveal, and I led up to this reveal with like 3 weeks of tension. It went on for week after week after week. When we finally got to Friday of week 3, nobody cared anymore, because I had gone too far with the building of tension, right?
Yeah.
It had gotten boring by then. It's like, are they going to do it? Maybe now they're going to do it. Are they going to do it? And it's like pretty soon, it's like, I don't care anymore if they do it or don't do it. I hope they die in the fire. It's done. It's done. The tension is over. So you've got, unfortunately, what you're looking for, and I know that you understand the number of panels, but just bringing that up, you're looking for a math. When you start talking panels, you're looking for a mathematical answer to an art question. And this really is all about art. Okay. So so the bad news is you got to learn by doing. The good news is we can tell you a couple things to look for when it comes to building tension. The first thing I want to talk about is that there's 3 parts of tension, and you can't do real good tension until you've accommodated all of those 3 things. Okay. And that is investment, uncertainty, and anticipation. The first part, and this is the part that everybody forgets. Before you can start to build narrative tension, I've got to have investment. And what that means is I got to care about the character. I cannot be strung along for any amount of tension until I care about the character. Disney does this great. They get us to care about a character immediately as soon as they have that first scene on the screen. And they've got a princess walking down in the woods, and a bluebird's landing on her finger, and she's singing about how she thinks that there's something more in the world, and we all feel like that, and we start to care about that character. If you want to see somebody nail investment, watch the first 60 to 90 seconds of the Pixar movie Up, right? That'll get you invested real quick.
Absolutely, absolutely.
They made us care passionately about a grumpy old man with the character design that was grumpy and old, and nothing was great about that guy, but they made us care about him passionately. So the first thing you got to do is investment. The second thing is uncertainty. You've got to line up certain things that might happen, and you don't know which way it's going to go. And the important thing there is I've got to care that something's going to happen, and that something is going to happen to this character that now I care about, and maybe the wrong thing's going to happen. So now I'm strung along. I can see that a whole bunch of things are possible, and some of them are not so great. And then you get to uncertainty. It could be any one of them. It could be any one of them, right? Now you get you've done investment, you've done uncertainty. Now you hit anticipation. Now you get to the point where you're building tension, because now you tell them you're going to get the answer pretty soon. You're going to get the answer pretty soon, and then you've got to build that up. And I can't tell you how many panels, I can't tell you how many pages. That is something you've got to learn by doing, because it's also every time it's different. I'd love to sit here and tell you, you've always got to have 5 panels of anticipation before you have your reveal, and then you can sit there and count out 5 panels. But it's not like that. You've got to build judgment, don't you think, Dave? You've got to learn by doing.
Yeah, and there are another way of saying anticipation is time, and it's really it's a balance of time. And like Brad said, you have to learn by doing, because oddly enough, drama like comedy, there is multiple ratios of time that could work, and 2 or 3 different versions of how much anticipation, how much time you're investing in there could work. In the same way that when a comedian lands a joke, the pause that happens after that, before you get to the next joke, you could either launch right into the next joke and ride the wave, right? Or sometimes you see them hold it and milk it, and the laughter grows, right?
Yeah.
And then there's even a third option where the laughter grows, it builds, it grows, it builds. Now they should jump into their joke, but they still don't. They wait, and the laughter dies back down again, and then uncomfortableness kicks in, and a whole nother wave or realization of the joke, and you get a third wave, right? And for that, in terms of comedians using that ability to modify anticipation, I would invite you to watch a short called "Kristen Schaal is a Horse" I think it's on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, Brad, it's an amazing experiment in how long you can milk a joke for the different tension points, right? And anticipation and time. So just check it out, because it shows you all the different ways that you can play with tension, anticipation, and time to deliver a joke. And there's some learning moments in it, as much as it's a ridiculous sketch. Kristen Schaal is a Horse. To see all the different ways that you can reveal or pop the balloon with time and anticipation. I want to say that Brad's really nailed this here. I don't know that I had ever put this down in thought, that investment and uncertainty and anticipation are the 3 things that build tension.
Yeah.
But I want to reinforce that, much like dancing, sometimes you have to do it to feel it, and only with repeated action can you know what works for you within your writing style, how long to wait for that anticipation, or how much uncertainty to give. Hitchcock always gave you really good 2 or 3, 4 options for how a thing was going to go, and that's why you felt tension. Are they about to be murdered? Are they about to find their missing brother? Is the child that they saw in scene 4 about to walk into the scene? You don't know, with the uncertainty that Hitchcock's giving you, which tension balloon is going to get popped. But oh my God, he's laid that groundwork. So and again, different versions of uncertainty, different versions of anticipation will work for your writing style based on how you've done it. And sometimes just repeated action, like Brad and I've always said, putting in your hours and doing it again and again and again, you'll know how many panels, as you were jokingly saying, work for you to build that tension.
Absolutely. And just as we're wrapping up this topic, I'll just tell you one more time, it's all about that first step where you make the initial investment. We've got to care about the character. I can't tell you how many times I've either in my students' work, or if somebody calls me in on a consultation, or I'm just reading stuff on the web that I come across, how many times I see somebody not taking the time to make me care about the character, right?
Yes.
And then any number of things can happen to that character, and you just don't care. So take some time with the character. I mean, the word is right there. The first syllable of character is care, and that's because it's the most important concept. I've got to care about this person that you're drawing. Otherwise, I'm not going to follow you around.
That was the most Susan McTaggarty thing you've ever said. That, friends, you can't say character without care, friends. That's
yeah, it's super important.
You can't say character without actor, and that's why. Anyway, all right. Well, let's move into our next question, Brad. This comes in over on Patreon.com/ComicLab, and it says, "Hey, Brad and Dave, this question comes after having accidentally hurt myself from drawing, and it breaks my heart to say I have stepped away and I am taking a long break. I am doing my best to rest until I can come back fully healed, but it does have me wondering if maybe I need to enlist some help in the future. Could you share some of your red flags and do's and don'ts about enlisting help to work on your comic, especially for a comic still in its infancy? Aside from the obvious worries about hiring the wrong person, there's also the anxiety about things not turning out like how I envision with my own two hands, or the probably foolish pride of being able to say that all of the art was done by me. Any advice is greatly appreciated." This is a great question. It's funny how we have two questions this week, Brad, that are both versions of RSI, repetitive stress injury, or injury in general, and how it relates to artwork. So just a reminder, friends, don't sleep on continuing pain that you might be feeling with drawing.
Yeah.
Figure out your posture, figure out your desk, figure out the breaks that you're taking, and look up good stretches for artists online. It's not something to joke around about.
Yeah, there's stretches you can do. There's exercises you could do. And if you're going to do this in the long run, it's pretty important for you to think about that. Now let's get to this question. Number one, as soon as I read Comic in its infancy, I pretty much had made up my mind about how I was going to address this. And that's, if your comic is in its infancy, you shouldn't be thinking about hiring anybody at this point. If you're like 90% of us, if you're just starting out, you don't have much of an audience yet, and that's just because that's where we all start at zero. You don't have an audience yet, and you're probably not making a lot of money. And hiring a assistant is a business decision. And so the first thing you've got to do with any business decision is a cost benefit analysis. How much is this going to cost? How much do I benefit? Is it worth the cost? If you're not bringing any money in and you're thinking about hiring somebody, you need to make better business decisions. This is not something you can do. You're much more in the zone where I was talking in the first half of the show, where you should be slowing down. You should be finding out when it's good for you to put out pages. You should be adjusting your pace, all that kind of stuff, because you're not in a position to shell out money just yet. If you're like most of us, right? Now, you might be bringing in a certain amount of income, and then your cost benefit analysis would be different. But if you're like most of us, if you've got a comic in its infancy, it's not a great idea to start thinking about hiring just yet.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. It's funny, I read the question slightly differently, and you tell me if my read is putting too much mustard on it. Mm-hmm. My read was, and again, I might be putting too much mustard on it. Comics bring me joy. I want to do comics. I have an injury now that's keeping me from doing comics, but I still want to feel that joy.
Right.
Now, here's where I put mustard on it. I have money from my day job, and rather than spend it on physical things or vacations or a PlayStation 5, I would like to still make my comic by hiring someone.
Yeah.
So maybe we can explore this question with that kind of mustard on it. Now, having said that, I agree with Brad that I don't know that it's a good idea to hire to work on this when there's no money coming in, so that you're now actively losing money on it. I want to say that I actually agree with Brad on that.
Yeah.
But let's play with the idea, Brad, that they have a job that's providing for them, and they have an X amount of not disposable income, but I guess, disposable income, where they could spend hiring someone.
Yeah.
What would be the conditions that would make it right, and how should they best go about doing it? You're already shaking your head. You still don't like this. All right.
No. I'm glad we're taking it this direction, because we should talk about this. But I wish I'd love to go back to any of our other topics, because I knew stuff about that. Unfortunately, I've been going back and forth about hiring an assistant for years at this point, and I struggle with this in my own life. So I don't know how I'm going to give this person advice.
Well, would you like me to do it? I can
go ahead.
I can jump
go
in.
ahead, because you're maybe in a better place. Because man, I've not been able to do this successfully.
So I've been lucky in that I've had four assistants over the years. Beth has worked with me full time for 6 years, the past 6 years. In fact, yesterday was the anniversary of her starting 6 years ago.
Wow.
She's been with me 6 years, and before her, Jen was with me for 4 years, and then had 2 other employees before that. But so the last decade has been 2 wonderful assistants, and I will tell you, when you find the right person, gosh, it makes everything wonderful, and it's joy filled, and it's great. And Beth and I like to think that we laugh a lot and we have a lot of fun while we're making serious projects happen. And it's been lovely. But I will say this, Beth is currently on maternity leave for the next 6 months, which is absolutely wonderful. And I'm so happy for her.
Yeah.
But I have been hemming and hawing like a motherfucker, because I'm having so much trouble after 6 years hiring again. It's not easy. And so Brad, I wrote up last night the job description for a temporary full-time cartoonist assistant and colorist. And I was going to send it to you. But God, it's pulling teeth, because really what you're doing is you're inviting someone into your life.
Yeah.
And much like me as an adult, it's kind of like that Seinfeld joke of like, I'm not interviewing for new friends. I hired everyone I needed 20 years ago. I don't need new friends. Yeah. I don't necessarily want to. I know it sounds grumpy. I don't necessarily want to invite new people into my workload. I just know that I can get way more done when I have an assistant, right? Like by leaps and bounds, I can get way more done. And so here's what I will say. If you're going to hire work for hire, which means they're paid, how do I describe it? It's not a payroll. It's based on the project. Right. So, for example, like if you do XYZ, you will get paid $500 for that, right? I need to
pause you just for a second, because this is important. That's not what work for hire is. And I just need to pause you. Yeah. Work for hire means when they do the work, you own the copyright.
Well, that's what I was going to get at. Well, no, this is good. This is clarifying, because I want to say you need a contract at that point that delineates that you can maintain all the copyright, that you are paying them X amount of sum. Here's what they can expect from the contract. Here are the terms of the contract. And you're going to want to have it's going to be about a 2 or 3 page contract, and you're going to need a lawyer to write it up. When they are an employee, it's both implicit and explicit that the work that they produce becomes part of the company. And that's the way so I incorporated my cartooning about, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And so it's an S Corp in the US, in the state of California, and in the federal government. And my employees are brought in and they're put on payroll. So much like, Disney or Warner Brothers, the work that they produce for the company is owned by the company, and that's both implicit and explicit. And so there's no work for hire contract needed per se. If I was a bigger, more grabby company, I would probably have them sign something too, but I'm not. But anyway, so if you're going to hire someone on payroll, then you're good to go. If you're going to put them on work for hire contracts, you're going to need something delineating the contract and what you owe. And frankly, based on the way you're describing it of a comic in its infancy, you're probably going to want to put some kind of contract in front of them anyway, even if you put them on payroll, because there's an argument to be made that they're at least half of the creative team that's creating this new thing. if it's in its infancy and they are the ones drawing it. So, and maybe that's part of your solution. Maybe you want to say it's a 50-50 going forward. I don't know. I don't know your situation. I don't know your solution. But that could make the process easier, perhaps.
Yeah, and you've also got to decide on how in terms of deciding how you're going to pay them. Let's say that you're a sole proprietorship, like many of us, and you're not an S corp or an LLC. You've got to decide how you're going to pay this person, right? And if they're going to be long distance, if you're like me and you just don't like anybody in your space, you like to be alone in your studio. Now you've got to take on trust, right? So you're either going to pay them by the hour and have them do a certain amount of things during that time, or you're going to have to pay them by the project. And then when they do a certain task, they get a certain amount of money.
Right.
Okay. And there's in each of those things, there's trust. And that's, by the way, been the biggest hiccup for me, is that I get right to that place. And then if there's any breakdown in trust, if there's something that goes on at that point and somebody throws me a curveball, then I can't trust them, and then I can't work with them. Yeah. Right. Because it's like, I'm trusting you to do the thing that I need you to do without me sitting and looking over your shoulder. That takes an enormous amount of trust because I'm paying for it. Right. And I've got to have it done. I've got to get my money's worth because I don't have money just sitting around to throw at stuff. So I've got to know that you are going to do the thing that you are saying you're going to do. And I can trust you that you're not artificially inflating the numbers, right? Oh, well, I actually did 3 of these tasks and I didn't do as many, or it took me longer to do this task than it really did. And so I'm invoicing you for more money. Trust is a huge thing. And if you don't have the person sitting there where you can watch what they're doing, you're trusting that they're sending you a correct invoice. And that is, I'll be honest with you, that's where it always stops for me time after time. It's like, nah, I don't trust this person. I'll do something else.
Brad is 100% right. And I'll tell you a different version of that same thing with trust, which is when the pandemic hit and Beth went from working 5 days a week in the studio to 5 days a week at home. Yeah. It was a different form of trust, which was, hey, you're on a salary. What's actually getting done? And versus Brad's work from hire thing, where it's, hey, I'm paying you an increased sum. Did this actually take you more time, kind of thing? And all of it comes down to trust. So it's a relationship of it's basically, it has to be an adult, mature relationship of trust. And it's hard with a new person that you've invited into your life to establish that. It's just time and effort and repeated patterns will show you how much you can trust. So, okay, so we've talked about how and ways you could do it. You could do it from work for hire, or you could do it for payroll, both of which have hiccups. When you do payroll, you basically find, there are big international companies like ADP that can do payroll for you. I don't like them. I actually like to do a mom and pop payroll company in Los Angeles that I can call up or ask silly questions about taxes or this and that. And they're much more amenable. And I frankly like working with mom and pops better. So you'd have to find a payroll company. And in terms of interviewing, that's a whole thing. You're going to want to be very specific about what you're looking for, what their task list would be as you're hiring them. And then in part, you probably want to do a couple Zoom interviews, or a Zoom interview. When I say a couple, get the candidates that do the best 3 to 5 that could potentially work. Do a couple Zoom interviews, and that's a gut check. Can I work with this person? Do I sense that we could have open and honest communication, which is so important when you're working with someone? And also enjoy one another's company. If someone drives you bonkers in an interview, that's not a good sign that on year 3, when things are going badly, that it's going to get better, So it's in some weird respect, it's a gut check of chemistry of like, do they like my way of looking at the world? Do I like their way of looking at the world? And then anything else we're missing there, Brad, in terms of hiring someone into your life? I mean, part of it is...
I'll say it.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll say it. Price has got to be right. The price has got to be right. I can't tell you the number of times that I've come close to, again, another hiring situation. And I'll be very honest with you. When they tell me, okay, it would cost X amount of money for me to handle your social media. I know they're probably not handling that the way I want it handled, right? They're not going to put as much passion into getting the words right as I get. And if I got to sit there and get the words right, I might as well be doing it. All that's left is pushing the button, right? So they've got to have a passion for building my brand or whatever online, right? So I got to believe they're doing that. But then it's the price. So then I look at what they're charging me to do this, and I'm like, every time, I'll be honest, I'll tell on myself again. I look at that and I go, I'll put the money in my pocket. I'll just do it myself. And you've got the money has got to be worth it for you. The money's got to be right. At a certain point, you do not want to get into a situation where you're spending more money than you think it's worth to get the amount of work done that you're getting, because then that's only going to happen for so long before you say to yourself, I made a mistake. I got to now you've got to fire somebody and say, we're not doing this anymore. We've reached the end because you made a bad decision, because you're spending however much money per week doing something that you could have done yourself. And then when you see it, you could have done it better. Yeah. There's nothing that is more painful than that. And I've actually had to do that years and years ago, where I had to say, this isn't working out. We're going to do something else. So then every time I look at this amount of money, it's like, I'll do it myself. Because I and this is, by the way, more my issues than maybe are your issues. Yeah. But I look at that and I say, if you want it done right, you got to do it yourself.
Yeah. So the major issues that you're going to talk about are you're going to need to talk about expectations. You're going to need to talk about who owns what in terms of the copyright of this comic that's still in its infancy. You're going to need to talk about pay rate, and you're going to need to talk about frequency of work. Are you working 40 hours a week, 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week, 10 hours a week? What's the expectation there? You're going to want to talk about off ramps in case things don't work out and how you might part ways. That's a very important part of both work for hire contracts and employment. And then at some point you're going to have to take the plunge, and it's a big deal. But like Brad said, I tend to err, and this is where my wife was good for me, because Los Angeles is a very expensive city to live in. And I had a number in my mind about how much an assistant should make. And Gloria's like, no, we live in Los Angeles. It's one of the most expensive cities in the world. You've got to pay at least, and we did the math, and the number ended up being around 60,000. She's like, you got to pay at least 60,000 if you're going to have an employee living in Los Angeles, affording rent, making a life. And I was like, you know what? You're right. And that's just the morally right thing to do, is you have to pay what your city. But if you're living in Des Moines, you might be able to get away with, I don't know, half that. I'm not sure, you know? And so, and then because everybody in comics has a GoFundMe, we ended up establishing a whole pension thing. So the employees for us, and that's more than any you want to hear in terms of this process. But what I'm saying is, you do kind of have a moral responsibility when you hire someone that you're giving them an achievable life. And so with Gloria and I, whenever we hire assistants, we also make it a point, and Brad has done this as well, that it's not just an employee relationship. You're trying to make their art career and their art journey better. So now, after 6 years, if Beth had to, she could launch a Kickstarter tomorrow. She knows how to run a Patreon. She knows how to do a comic convention. She knows how to order merchandise from all over the world, from all sorts of types of vendors. She knows how to run websites. She could do everything that she wants to do with her art career as far as what I was able to teach her. That's a uniquely wonderful thing. And so part of I also feel a responsibility like that with assistants, and Brad has done this too. Brad is still mentoring past assistants and interns from years ago in order to help better their career. So, because part of what we do as artists is to pay it forward to the next generation. So, okay, this is more mustard than you wanted on this question, because you're just trying to hire someone to rate your art. But what I'm saying is, there are moral responsibilities when you bring someone in to do your art. They're not just servicing your art. It's now a relationship in your life, and you've got to service what they need as a person to live and work in this world, and also to go on and flourish in their career and their journey.
Yeah, and moral responsibility is the right term for that. You've got to consider what your moral responsibility is. For example, Dave, we've got a moral responsibility to allow people to have a little break from our voices. We've been doing this for an hour, and our moral responsibility is to give these folks a break. So I get to say you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
The Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. And don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Spotify, where we are burning up the podcast charts.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/hello, you've reached Ziggy. Please leave a message after the beep. And no, I don't need a warranty on my car. I'm Ziggy. I say good morrow to you, Greg Ricketts. It's me, Edgar Allan Poe, your neighbor.
Well, sorry, this is Greg Ricketts here, but hold on. And I think that I should never see, and done. Just wrote another poem. What are you up to, Edgar?
Still working on The Raven, I'm afraid.
Oh, I'm sorry. And once was a man from Nantucket, and done.
I didn't anticipate Nantucket. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, I'm sorry, Edgar. I just wrote another one of my poems. Go ahead. And so you're doing some stuff, are you there?
I'm doing. I can't decide if it's quoth the Raven or quoth a Raven. I'm working on that for the next week, I think.
And do not go bravely into that good night. And done. Sorry, I just had to put the finishing touches on another poem. I'm hoping you're doing well. Sorry, I wish I could stay on the phone with you, but I've got to see a man about a horse with no name. And done.
Well, if anything, you've given me inspiration on working on my poem about the inevitability of death and wanting it to come sooner.
Well, one thing's for sure, you don't have to worry about working on your New England accent, because I've already showed you that I've done that better than anyone.
I know neither one of us were doing New England well. I was doing I don't know what it was, Virginia with a drawl, and you were doing a vaguely British version. Hello, I'm Greg Ricketts. Yes, there once was a man from Nantucket. I say, that's quite spicy, that one.
If we would have gone for 5 more minutes, I would have gone straight into Transylvanian. It's the only one that I can do.